In this video, I'm going to make a coffee table from a single 8-foot 2x6. I started at the miter saw to cut all my pieces to length, and I cut the 2x6 into two sections about 30 inches and two sections about 18 inches. And I say about just because it kind of depends on the kerf of your blade. I have a somewhat thinner kerf blade on my miter saw, and also the 2x6 that I bought was actually an extra 1/4 inch long for some reason, because those 2x6s vary a little bit. So I was able to get away with 18 inches and 30 inches, but you might need to cut yours a tad shorter to account for the kerf. Next, I took my sections over to the table saw and cut an 1/8 inch off each side of each piece to remove the roundover. And sometimes I get comments saying that it'd be a lot faster if I just took the roundover off the whole 2x6 to start with. But the reason that I don't do that and I cut them to length first is because any warp in the 2x6 is going to be amplified by the length. So if I cut the 2x6 into shorter pieces first, the warp is less noticeable and it's a lot easier to cut. I can set the two 18-inch sections aside for later, and now I'm going to use the 30-inch sections to make the tabletop. So first, I cut each of the 30-inch sections to 4.5 inches wide. The roughly 11/16 inch offcut from that are going to be the longer sides of the apron, but for right now, I'm just going to put those with the 18-inch sections to use for later. Next, I need to resaw the tabletop boards in half, and after you take out the kerf of the blade, that's 11/16 inches. And then I can just glue those four boards together into a panel. While that was drying, I'm going to make the breadboard ends. So I took one of the 18-inch sections over to the table saw and resawed that in half like I did with the 30-inch sections, and those will make the two ends. Then to joint the ends to the top, I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch groove in both pieces, and I can cut these grooves a lot quicker than I usually can because I finally got a dado stack. Actually, one of my neighbors saw my video on making doors where I had to cut all the grooves with a single blade, and they felt bad for me. So they actually bought me a dado stack, which was really nice and made this whole process go a lot faster. The glue is pretty much dry at this point, so I could unclamp the panel and then cut the tenons on the ends of the panel to accept the breadboard ends. Now I can fit in the breadboard ends, and a lot of people say you shouldn't glue in breadboard ends and just dowel them in place instead to allow for wood movement. So if that's a concern for you, you shouldn't do what I'm doing. I'm gluing these in. That's just how I've always done it, and I've never really had an issue with it. But you know, if it does break in the future or something, I'll just fix it. Now at the other 18-inch section, I'm going to make the legs and both of the shorter sides of the apron. So first I replaced the dado stack back to the normal cutting blade, and I set the fence back to 11/16 of an inch, and I ripped off 2 strips that are going to make the shorter sides of the apron, and then I resawed what was left of that section in half, and those 2 pieces are going to make the legs. I wanted the legs to be tapered, so I'm marking that out right now, and I'm making it so the legs are 2 3/8 inches at the top, and then they taper down to 1.25 inches at the bottom. I also want the legs to go out at an angle, so along with the taper, I'm also cutting the ends of each leg off at a 15-degree angle. Last thing I have to do to finish the legs is cut notches to fit the shorter sides of the apron. So I measured out a 1/2 inch away from the edge, and then I used one of the apron sides to trace out the notch to cut. I'm done with the legs, and I don't have to do anything with the shorter sides of the apron, but to join the longer sides of the apron to the legs, I'm going to cut a half lap. So first I kept the saw at 15 degrees and I cut off the ends of each of the longer sides of the apron at 15 degrees. And then I moved my saw over to 19 degrees, which is the angle of the legs 15 plus the angle of the taper 4 degrees, and at 19 degrees is what I cut the half lap at. So I know that's a little bit confusing, so if you want to like do a different joint, like just dowel the apron into the legs, you can do that too, but I just like the way that this looks. And now you can see how that half lap fits onto the leg, and hopefully you can better understand what I was doing with those angles earlier. And now I'm just fitting the apron and the legs together. When I'm attaching these shorter apron pieces, I'm actually letting them go about 3/4 of an inch past, just because I like how that looks. At this point, the breadboard ends are well attached, and I can unclamp the top, but before I attach the top to the legs, I decided to add a heavy chamfer along the bottom edges. This isn't necessary for any reason, just something that I thought would look cool. And now I can attach the top to the legs, And to do that, I'm using finish screws, which are screws with really tiny heads on them. And I just like them because they're very unnoticeable. Last step before finish, I sanded the table up to 220 grit, and I'm using sanding discs from Empire Abrasives, and I was actually pretty surprised at the price. It's only 30 bucks for a pack of 100 discs, which is quite a bit cheaper than the Diablo ones that I usually get from Home Depot, and I can't really tell the difference. And on top of that, you can get 10% off using my link and code in the description. They sent me a bunch of free stuff after seeing my treadmill sander video, which was very nice of them. So check them out if you need some sanding stuff. And finally, to finish the table, I'm going to put on a couple coats of shellac. Okay, so as you can see, it can hold my weight pretty well. I was a little bit afraid with the legs going out at an angle that the legs might want to spread, but on carpet, there's not really an issue. I weigh 160, so it holds quite a bit of weight. Not that it really has to, because it is just a coffee table, but it can if you want to. There's kind of these grooves that I cut for the breadboard ends just because I wanted a little bit of separation there. I didn't talk about that in the video. And then also, I actually switched out the top. I get comments asking how exactly I go through the process of making these 1 2x6 videos. And one thing that I do, I usually draw it out first, and then I'll make one off camera to make sure I can do it with 1 2x6, and then I'll make the final version. This is the final version. So with this one, it was one of the few times where the first version actually kind of ended up, I liked the way it looked better. So I have 2 of these. I just used the one from the first one for the end shots here.